My name is Judge Wallace Clark. I was the first municipal court judge in Montana, right here in Missoula. And this is kind of the highlights of my life and my family's life. I was born in Sweetgrass, Montana in 1916. That's right on the Canadian border. I was born within a couple hundred feet of the Canadian border. I grew up in Sweetgrass and Shelby, living the good life, riding horses and having fun on the High Line. My father was Othniel D. Clark. He was the sheriff of Toole County, and later on when he died he was U.S. Deputy Marshal out of Great Falls. The Clarks came from Kentucky in the late 1880s to Montana and settled up there. There's still Clarks up in the Sweetgrass Hills. My mother, Agnes Shane Clark, came to Montana via Canada, originally from Northern Ireland. And she was about 4'10" and tough as nails right up until the day she died. She kept everybody in control. And I attended school in Shelby. I graduated from the Shelby High School. I went to the University of Montana. During the summers at the university, I worked as a customs official up on the border, the Canadian border. I graduated from the university in 1940, and in September of 1940, I enlisted in the Montana National Guard. My mother was proud to be an American and new to the country and thought her sons ought to serve right away. In May of 1941, I joined the regular Army and received an officer's commission. Obviously, Pearl Harbor happened December 7th, 1941. We went to war full on. I went to the European theater, starting off with the North African campaign, Sicily, Italy, and then southern France. I was an infantryman and later assigned to a medical battalion. After the war, I was back here in Missoula to continue my education. I wanted to go to law school. I met my wife, Mary Beth, who's usually right as I started off, at a church social. I took her out. I took her out on a nice picnic. I laid it all out. She didn't have to lift a finger. I know that because I've heard this over and over again, because apparently after I married her, that never happened again. But she was a Missoula girl. Her grandfather brought that side of the family out to Missoula in the late 1880s with the Northern Pacific Railroad. He was a bridge and building engineer for the railroad. His wife, Emily, followed him along the railroad camps, managing the meals for the camp workers. He was the one who bought the house that we still have, that has raised 5 generations of us downtown, and he bought that in 1905. We're standing right at the family plot. This is my wife's family's plot here. Joshua Fleming was my wife's grandfather. His wife, Emily. They had a daughter, Lillian. Lillian married a doctor, Dr. Tony, who I have been told repeatedly by my mother-in-law that he was a kind and gentle man from Indiana. That usually would come out to show contrast, apparently, towards me. But he died, unfortunately, young. He died very young. He was caring for influenza patients here in Missoula during the influenza epidemic. Anyway, once we were married, we raised 3 children. I graduated from law school in '47. I wanted to be a lawyer, obviously, but I also wanted to be in the military. The Army at that time didn't have positions open for me, but the Air Force said they'd let me be a lawyer, and so I joined the Judge Advocate General's Corps of the U.S. Air Force, and for those that don't know, that's when it was started. It used to be the Army Air Corps, and then it became the U.S. Air Force. I served with the Air Force from '47 till '63. I traveled around the world. I took my family most places, including my mother-in-law, who was a widow, and she traveled with us and lived with us until she died. I was in Japan, Ankara, Turkey, and my last posting was at the Pentagon. During the Turkey years, I was there from '57 to '59. I thought it'd be fun to entertain the troops, so I decided we ought to have a Montana rodeo. So I rounded up some livestock and horses and enough guys that could ride horses, or at least thought they could ride horses, and we put on a rodeo for the guys, for the troops. And this is a real rodeo. We had bucking broncos and roping expeditions, and I mean, it was the full deal in the middle of Ankara, Turkey. While there, obviously I was with the JAG Corps, and one of my things that I took care of was sometimes the servicemen would get in trouble with the Turkish authorities and be arrested. Well, I would go down there and get them out as soon as I could. And if I couldn't get them out that day, if they had to stay overnight in a Turkish jail, I stayed with them outside the cell. And the reason I did that is because if an officer was present, the Turks wouldn't abuse the servicemen. When I retired from the military, we came back to Missoula. I retired, I had cataracts. And back then, you have cataract surgery, they'd sandbag your head for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And I mean, you couldn't move. It was nothing like it is now. But anyway, I never trusted myself to drive again. So that's why you saw me walking around town for the rest of my life. I was an old infantryman, so walking was no big deal, and I walked around. My wife, Mary Beth, said it wasn't that I couldn't see, it was because I liked to be chauffeured by her. Once I got back to town, I started a private law practice. I also worked for the Missoula County Attorney's Office for a short while. I ran for county coroner in the 60s. I didn't get elected to that. I would actually later in 1980 run for the Montana Supreme Court. I was defeated in that. While in the 60s, I was with my friend John Toole, and John Toole would be a future mayor of Missoula. We were walking by the courthouse, and we saw these records, county records, that were in a dumpster, and it must have been from an office remodel or something. And I'm a big lover of history. I read all the time, and Montana history especially, and that just shocked me. So John and I took turns guarding that dumpster so it didn't get taken away, and then we took turns running in and trying to call somebody that had a pickup. Well, once we found somebody with a pickup, we climbed in the dumpster and dug the records out, took them over to the university, and copies of them are still there at the Mansfield Library. In '67, I was elected to police judge, and that was before municipal court. Police judge was like the city traffic judge. The city police department had a row of jail cells in the police department, kind of temporary jail cells. The county still ran the sheriff's office ran the real jail on the 4th floor of the courthouse, but the city would put temporary prisoners in these cells. I would get up in the middle of the night and walk down there unannounced and just check on the prisoners. And I did that because I wanted the prisoners to show up in my court looking the same as they did when they went into the jail. And unfortunately, then as now, sometimes the wrong people are allowed to wear a badge, and that was my way to keep people on their toes. Mary Beth always thought that she'd get a call in the middle of the night because I was accidentally run over by a police car on the way home. In April of '77, I was elected as the first municipal court judge in Montana. Missoula was the first city to have one. The previous legislative session enacted that. I served as a municipal court judge from '77 until '89, when I was defeated by Judge Don Loudon. He was a city attorney for years. During these municipal court years is when most of the stories came about of my idea of justice and my interpretation of the law. And I'm stubborn, and I don't mind sharing my opinion about that. Some people didn't like it, and other people did like it. But my point was, I was a judge. Judges are there to look at the case and make their own determination. Every case is different. If we didn't need a judge, we could just use a matrix system. You do this, I look down the list, you get a fine, you get jail time. That's the way it is. That's not how it is. We have judges for a reason. The law is interpreted. Now people say, well, that's not just. Justice is everybody gets the same penalty. For example, a stop sign violation. Everybody gets a $50 fine. I can understand part of that argument, that being just. Justice across the board. The counter argument to that is, if you make $200,000 a year, a $50 fine is a pittance to you. But if she is a single working mother raising 2 kids, $50 could mean food on the table or not food on the table. So, what is fair? What is just? Every case is different. One of the times when justice comes out in my court more strictly than others is when I have people in front of me that fought with the police. And sometimes it surprises them when they get the stiff penalties. And I tell them, if you fight with the police out there on the street, you're going to get stiff penalties in here because I have to do my job in here. If I don't do my job in here, they might start doing my job on the street, and we don't want that. An example of one of the cases that came before me was a lady brought in on shoplifting, and she pled guilty, and I asked her, why are you here? What happened? And she said, well, I just moved from Spokane and with my boyfriend, and I got 2 kids. And my boyfriend left us, and he took a lot of the stuff. And it's getting cold, and the stuff I stole, Judge, was clothes for the kids. So I called the city officer in, and I said, what's on the list? What was stolen? And he said, yeah, it was kids' clothes. I said, okay, well, you pled guilty, and I'm going to give you a deferred sentence. You stay out of trouble for 6 months, this doesn't go on your record. I told the city officer, go over to the store, take that stuff back, and buy the exact same stuff. I'll buy it. And this lady will pay me back when she can. This is a loan. When you get on your feet, you pay me back. Well, the neat thing is, about a year later, she came back into my court, and she paid every penny back. And I said, thanks, but you've done enough. And I slid it back to her, and she said, nope, it was a loan. You gave me a loan, I appreciate it. Here's the money back. I said, yep, it was a loan, but now it's a gift. I never had a lot of money in my pocket, but when I did, if somebody needed a hand, I'd walk them over to the Hamburger Ace and buy them a hamburger and a Coke. I didn't see my court as a generating arm, a revenue generating arm of the city. That upset a lot of city officials because it's a heck of a revenue generating arm if you let it be. But I didn't see that. I was a public servant, not a revenue agent. And so I had creative sentences, and I had some fines, but some people say I didn't have enough fines, and I don't care. If they didn't like my form of justice, I'd remind them that this is a court of record, which means there's transcripts, there's tapes, and you can appeal this court. You can appeal this court all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. It's about 2,000 miles east, and by the time your case gets there, I'll be dead. Again, I stayed in office until I was defeated by Judge Loudon, who was a city attorney for years. In August of '88, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And in November of 1990, I died at home, in the family home, surrounded by family, which is not a bad way to go. Thank you.
Thank you.